Ladies and gentlemen, welcome into another edition of Deportes Nation. I'm Alex Parra, and today with a very special guest. She's a soccer commentator, she's a soccer guru, she's done it all. And by the way, she's an all-around wonderful person. I welcome into the show Miss Jen Cooper. Jen, first of all, how are you and welcome?
I'm doing great, and thank you for that intro. That was wonderful. We should add native Houstonian, right? So I'm all about bringing soccer to my hometown.
That's great. Jen, it's always a pleasure to speak with you, and I know we've met on several occasions being around the soccer world. I guess my first question really is, how did you get involved in the sport? You know, many of us grew up playing, and we come to this point as commentators, as broadcasters, with different backgrounds. But if you could briefly, because we talked about this, give us an idea of your background and what's brought you to, I think, being really one of the caretakers of the sport, certainly in our city.
I would say, long story short, it would be the 1994 World Cup, which was, as you know, is the first one hosted in the U.S. That was the first time that I saw high-level soccer on TV. You know, growing up in Houston, that was not something, not something I was exposed to very much. Had a couple of friends that played soccer. That was it. That changed my life, literally. Watching the high level of play, and specifically the Swedish goalkeeper, Thomas Ravelli, I was like, I want to be that. I want to play goalkeeper. I had played a little bit of rec soccer, but was not very interested in it. That changed everything. I wanted to be goalkeeper. I learned how to play goalkeeper. I fell in love with it. I started being captain of my rec team. I got involved with the league. I was vice president, and then I was president, and then my alma mater, Rice, started a women's varsity team, so I was a booster for them. Then we had NWSL, the women, it just like on and on. And then, it was 16 years ago this fall, we had the Dynamo fall into our laps, literally. So I was involved with the Dynamo from the very beginning, before they were even called the Dynamo. And so I've just, anywhere I could get involved, I got involved. And as you know, Houston is so much a small town, right? That we all seem to know each other, that over the years that's benefited me, where it's like, oh yeah, well, Jen can help us with that, or she knows this. And, so it meant so much to me back in 2014 when we got the Dash, another thing that kind of, I feel like, fell into my lap, that I got the role of doing on-air analyst for the Dash for the first 3 seasons before they took the streams national. But that's the shortest version I can give you, Alex.
And look, Jen, your contributions, by the way, have been huge to our city. I hope you know that. A lot of people respect you. A lot of us respect you. And you've earned everything you have, by the way. By the way, you should have a lot more. And I think we're going to talk about that in the context of our conversation. You mentioned the Dash, obviously part of the NWSL. Right now, the NWSL is going through a difficult period. The allegations that have been brought up, and we're trying to be fair and objective as much as possible. But certainly, it's not a positive environment right now. It's already a league, and you and I know this. I've been blessed to be around several players that work at the youth level. I'll put it this way, and they earn more as coaches than they do as players for the NWSL. So I know there's a lot there. What was your initial reaction when you heard about these allegations, these current allegations in the NWSL, Jen?
Yeah, and it's a bit depressing to have to say current allegations, because it's been a very wild ride of a season. These current allegations, I have to say, were the most surprising to me. It's nothing I'd ever heard before about Paul Riley. Some of the other allegations that have come out this summer were not surprises, were things we had heard inkling of before. Yeah. But when I look at the entirety of the season, I think about that a lot of this is just long overdue. It wasn't necessarily the NWSL commissioner's fault, right? She really, I think, became the scapegoat for the board of governors for the NWSL. But a lot of these issues were so long overdue to be dealt with. So as upsetting as it is, as surprising as it is, at the same time, I feel like we're at this amazing place of almost starting fresh. The way that the players themselves, especially the non-national team players, the ones that you're talking about that make more as coaches than as players, the way they are stepping up and owning this league and caring about this league and saying, no, we don't want to burn it down. We want to save it. We want to do whatever we can. We want this league to succeed in the same way that we've seen, the league itself step up and replace the commissioner with an interim CEO who was the best pick imaginable, Marla Messing, who is the reason that the 1999 Women's World Cup was so successful. So it's moves like that just give me such hope for 2022. Hearing that Kansas City, they're going to build their own stadium, right? Louisville is building a training facility. We've got 2 new teams coming on board. Some great high profile coaches coming in. So it's been an insane season. But I think it's just, I think, probably the toughest growing pains the league will ever go through.
And Jen, let me be devil's advocate here. If the foundation itself is not solid in anything we do, are we going to have recurring problems? I understand your perspective. Look, this is the league we have. Let's own it. Let's love it. Nothing is perfect. But if at the core, and there's been allegations of the problem is that the foundation of all of this is set up wrong. That the NWSL is for some people just, it's checking a box. There's no real love behind it. You mentioned Kansas City and other ownership have shown the opposite. But is this part of a cleansing, if you will? I like the term reset, starting fresh. And I think this will open everyone's eyes to what can be done better, we hope, right?
Yes, and I think reset is a great word for it. I also like your phrase, checking a box, because we have had people involved in the past who they were just checking a box. Yeah. And I think with the new owners coming in terms of San Diego and Angel City, it's already, before any of these allegations came out, it was already putting pressures on the existing teams of, no, we're gonna up the standards. Same with Louisville coming on this season in terms of, no, we're going to run things a real way. Everybody else should be doing the same thing. I think the straggler in all of this has been less the clubs and more the league itself. And I think the league office itself. And I think that's partly because for a long time it was run by U.S. Soccer. Yeah. So it was this kind of, we're running that too. We keep forgetting, right? And there's been this tough transition to standing on its own. In a very strange time where, there's so much money that you need to spend if you're going to do things right. And at the same time, trying to be cost conscious.
Sure.
And it's, anytime I hear the players say, well, so-and-so makes this, we should make that too. As much as I want players to make more money, at the same time, it's like, hey, these games aren't making money yet. There's barely a TV deal. It's like, to me, this is very much where MLS was at this time in their history.
Sure.
I think it's easy for us to forget that first year with the Dynamo, there were 12 teams in the league.
Just starting,
and now we're at 30, 32. I can't even keep up. And I remember what was at the end of the 2002 season for MLS, they cut 2 teams, right? And then just added 2 teams a few years later, and it was barely hanging on. I mean, what MLS had, what none of the women's leagues have ever had, was 3 billionaires that were willing to keep it running until, so I think it's been a much rockier journey. But I feel like the cracks in the pavement, the weaker part of the foundations are finally being addressed as this isn't right. We need to do this right.
Sure. With us here on Deportes Nation, soccer guru, I'll call her Miss Jen Cooper. and Jen, you mentioned the money. You and I live with the Dynamo Dash organization, the discrepancy, although often lately the Dash attendance has been higher than the Dynamo attendance. And I say that in jest, but it's also true. What can we do? All the people that may be watching us today that are in the community, not only in the Houston or Texas soccer community, but throughout the United States, I think it's incumbent on us to do our part. And what I mean by that is supporting. We talk about our girls, our daughters, and our sons. We should expose them to the NWSL. And I think that's one of the pieces that will make this continue to grow. And like you said, in 10 years, I hope we're having a completely different conversation.
Exactly. But one of the things that I wish we would move away from is tagging NWSL or any women's soccer with "this is for the little girls." Right? We've never promoted men's professional sport as we need to do this for the little boys. No. This is an adult entertainment option. Adults go to men's soccer games, Astros games, and they take their kids.
Right.
The kids grow up going, oh, this is what adults do. What we've done to women's soccer over the last 25 years, when it's been branded too much as this is for the little girls go and they grow up and they go, oh, but that's what little girls do. I'm not going anymore. We've seen generations of screaming little girls at these games. They're not growing up and going to games. Part of that is the American, we're not raising people to watch games, though I think that's changing, right? Like anyone who was under 25 or under 30 really has no memory of there not being an MLS.
Correct.
Right? Where you and I can remember many years.
The Dark Ages. I call them the Dark Ages, Jen. Yes.
Yeah. So, but back to what we can do, and this is something that that's my framework, right? Of like, what can I do? It's, hey, go to a game. If you can't go to a game, watch a game, and not on an illegal stream, but on an official stream so that they know you're watching. Buy the merch. If you already have tickets, treat someone who's never been to a game before to tickets. For away games, host a watch party, either at home or a local bar. My favorite hangout, the Phoenix, I've gotten them to host Dash watch parties since the first season, right? So they've got Dash scars up along all their other scars.
Jen, I'm going to interrupt you. What drives you? Because you have been relentless for years doing this. And at times when some people have said, oh, enough of that, or I don't have the time or inclination. Again, that's why I go back to who you are. And you're one of the people that really supports the sport. What is it, just you love the sport so much? I won't put words in your mouth. What drives you not to give up?
Well, especially when it comes to women's soccer, I would say the biggest thing for me, especially with how my alma mater started a soccer team about the same time as we had the 1999 Women's World Cup, how that came together. And at the same time, I'm watching these games, these 1999 World Cup games, and the women look like me. I think that's why it's much more than a little girl looking adult. It's like, no, I'm just an average person. I'm watching this. They look like me. And that's one of the reasons I love soccer, is that it's not a sport that is dependent on one body type. It's not like basketball where you have to be really tall. It's not like American football where you have to be really bulky. Any size, build, can play. There's so many different skill levels. I mean, when I used to play co-ed, there were some teams we would play against that had 3 generations of one family on one team, right? No other sport adapts that way. And frankly, one of the things I also love about soccer is the international flavor to it that I've tried to tell people who don't know soccer but are really into NFL. I say, imagine if there was an NFL in every country in the world. How rabid would you be? Because you would have that many NFLs. I said, that's what soccer is for me. I can never stop learning about it. There will never be an end point. There's too many leagues, and then you have the whole national team thing. It's never ending. So I hope that sums that up.
No, that's perfect. And Jen, you mentioned the U.S. Women's National Team and the fight for equality. I'm going to use that term. Correct, incorrect, maybe we can discuss that. But it certainly is and has been an uphill battle. We know the players personally have gone out on a limb often, again, suing their own federation. We know that's an ongoing legal battle. I imagine that even beyond competing on the field, having these pressures on these ladies it can be huge. It's part, I hope, of an evolution. I like your perspective on this. This is part of development and growth, and hopefully we'll remember this in a few years and say we came out of it in a positive way. But where do you see the U.S. Women's National Team relative to pay, relative to equality, relative to more than anything, the support that our federation and our country needs to give it?
Well, one thing I feel that gets lost in all the coverage of their fight for equal pay is they remain the highest paid women's national team in the world.
Correct.
They remain the best compensated. And that doesn't mean that that's an end game. And I know that they look at it as, well, we're leading the way. There's so much that they're fighting for that I agree with, but there are also some things that I don't agree with. I thought it was really interesting when they still are technically suing U.S. Soccer for bonus money that would have come from FIFA, where I feel like it might have been more beneficial all these years to partner up with U.S. Soccer and maybe some other federations and fight FIFA, where, it's like, it's not going to benefit anybody if they win that and it bankrupts U.S. Soccer, right? That doesn't benefit anybody. I'm going to jump in. But I love that. Go ahead.
Forgive me. We talk about FIFA, like the overlord of soccer. I'm going to say this. They're one of the most, if not the most corrupt organization on this planet. And here we are as U.S. Soccer, and then as it trickles to us, a club coach, etc., bowing to them. There has to be a balance there. I went off on my FIFA tangent, Jen, but you're right. There's something sometimes, again, back to the foundation question. If FIFA is overseeing all of us, man, maybe we've got to look at it in a different direction.
Well, that's why I was a little pleased to see all the familiar names on the committee that FIFA put together to look at. I mean, it's still such a silly discussion of, whether the World Cup should be more often, and then also looking at women's soccer, like how they should handle their calendar. There's a lot of familiar U.S. and Canadian names on that. So it's like, okay, at least it's people that I have a little bit more respect and trust for on that list. And similarly with U.S. Soccer, when you look at who is president now, it's a 99er. Yeah. The U.S. Women's National Team General Manager, Kate Margraf, another 99er. I feel like the overhaul in the top level of U.S. Soccer in just the last couple of years is probably the best thing that's ever happened for that federation. Sure. So the U.S. Women's National Team, a lot of their fight, a lot of what's in their lawsuits and their fights has been related to stuff predating those people. So I feel like in some ways U.S. Soccer is getting a bad rap where it's like, no, that was the previous U.S. Soccer. But don't get me wrong, they need to fight for everything that's theirs. And I think what U.S. Soccer has done recently and said, okay, U.S. women, U.S. men will give you the exact same deal, kind of like put the burden back on the teams. And I would love to see our U.S. women and our U.S. men negotiating together. That would, I think, ultimately make them more powerful in the long run. Sure. But then you don't have any way that down the line, like, oh, they've got a better deal than we do, right? Then it's just the same. We have so many federations in the world that the men and women negotiate together. So maybe that's the long-term answer. With a soccer expert, Ms. Jen Cooper, excuse me, here on Deportes Nation. Jen, always a pleasure. Locally, we're both based out of Houston, Texas. The 2026 World Cup is coming to North America, right? Canada, Mexico, United States. Specifically, I think it's a no-brainer, in my mind at least, that some games would take place in Houston. And I can't believe we're already thinking ahead that far. But to me, it's a great soccer community. We talk about our diversity in so many ways. And it's a city that many of us have lived, again, the dark ages when we didn't even have a soccer-specific stadium. We had no pro team. Thinking about my experience, the last World Cup, of course, in the United States, 94, going to the Cotton Bowl, having that and bringing that to NRG, to me would be huge. And I would imagine you're an advocate of us getting Houston being a side for the World Cup. I would be so surprised if Houston doesn't get a couple of games. Having worked 3 different editions of the CONCACAF Gold Cup at Reliance Stadium, I know how pleased CONCACAF and U.S. Soccer were with those. We had the Copa Centenario semifinal. Yeah. We've had, 2 Super Bowls in the modern era that have been run. Don't forget Rice a few decades ago. That's why I said modern era. Yeah. And of course, it's like international city with 2 international airports, so many hotels. It's like, I know from the bidding perspective, we have everything, that's needed, where it's like such a great location. And I know people never think of Houston as a destination, right, for like a vacation, but anyone that ever comes here is like, oh, wow.
I didn't know that.
I didn't know. So I am very looking forward to that announcement
Jen,
about Houston being on the list.
Forgive me for interrupting you. I hope so too. And in my youth, and I'm maturing every day, as I can see on camera. HD cameras are not nice to me. In my youth, I would say, why are those people who are not soccer people affiliated with this? Why are they? I took soccer and I love soccer. I love the sport. I love what it's given me. And I've been in Houston since the mid '80s. But I was very selfish in our sport, right? I'm actually gone the other way now as I've matured. It's good that other people who maybe don't even really care about the sport are advocating for this World Cup, because it takes all of us. And I think that'll raise the bar for future generations. That'll raise the bar for men and women's soccer here in our city. And we haven't even talked about collegiate soccer for men and women in our city. We are becoming, I think, a world-class soccer city. And I think that's being demonstrated every day, from the youth level to the professional level, to having wonderful people like you. And I think it would culminate with the World Cup.
Yeah. I know a lot of times in the media, when we're going through bid cities, they try to portray like, oh, it's, this is a soccer city, and that's usually based on fandom.
Right.
But I know, and from how they look at the bids, they're not worried about the local fans, because that's not who is ultimately traveling to buy all these tickets.
Paying the money, right?
They're looking at how easy it is to get to the city, get around the city, or is all the infrastructure there? Are all the important people on board? Like you're saying, the people who are not necessarily soccer people, but see that by hosting a few of the games, Houston gets to see the boon of more visitors, more travelers, all that kind of stuff. I love the idea of watching a World Cup game in 2026, and you have that midfield signboard that says Houston.
Wow.
Right?
That would be great.
Like elevating us to that. We know, that we have all the pieces in place for that to be done well.
A no-brainer in my mind. Jen, just a couple of quick hits here, and give me your opinion on this. The future now of the Dynamo franchise under new ownership with Mr. Siegel. Positive, negative, what do you think? Where do we go from here?
I was really excited when I heard the announcement about Ted Siegel, especially when he said that Tab Ramos was his childhood hero. That tells me that he was kind of getting into soccer at the same time that I was, kind of watching the '94 World Cup,
right.
For the first time. And someone that just seems very positive. He's been at several games. He's not afraid to speak publicly. We've had silent owners for the most part in the past, right? So I think that's a really nice change.
Collegiate soccer at the local level, U of H, the HBUs, the smaller universities all over Southeast Texas. I see this continuing to grow and improve. My personal pet peeve, and I'm an alum from the University of Houston, is we don't have a men's team. And I know it's related to the number of teams, women and men, and Title IX, I believe, is the correct response I always get. But when I was there, we had the talent. Again, U of H men's soccer in general, at Rice even, their club teams, we know that. But I think it will continue to grow. Do you?
I really hope it does, because I've had that question from people for the last 20 years.
Yeah.
Like, why are there not more men's teams? And Title IX is usually it. Not that I remember the first time I met Dom Kinnear, he said there aren't any Division I teams in Houston because HBU hadn't gone back to D1 yet.
Correct.
And he's like, were they all cut because of Title IX? I said, no, Dom, we never had them.
That's right.
We never had them. I said all of the women's ones were added because as we've seen college populations become majority female,
correct.
Soccer was the easiest sport to add. You didn't have to add a field. Everybody already had a field, right? Yeah. It's much easier to add than women's softball, which requires its own separate, kind of facility.
Yeah.
But I remember asking the athletic director at Rice nearly 20 years ago when I was still working at Rice, saying, why don't we get rid of men's golf, and add men's soccer?
And you were fired immediately. No.
Thankfully, I didn't work for him. But I love his response. He said, actually, he goes, golf cost me almost nothing. Wow. He said, all of the scholarships, the athletic scholarships have been endowed. the coach is also a professor. I don't maintain a facility. And it was fascinating to learn it from that perspective.
Yeah.
It's like, because if they added men's soccer, they'd have to add another women's sport. And Rice has the exact minimum of sports required to be a Division I school.
Yeah.
They have exactly 7 men's and exactly 7 women's, and that's it. But
Just
that's so that baseball can be Division I. What I look at, I don't put the burden on Rice or U of H so much as I look at Texas A&M and UT. They could, in a heartbeat,
absolutely
add men's soccer and add another women's sport without even thinking about it. And because of the conferences they're in and the money that their athletic departments have, those would be competitive programs, right?
Excellent
like
point.
I don't think it's fair to put that burden on U of H and Rice. That burden should be on UT and A&M.
Excellent point. Although U of H is wanting to play with the big boys in the Big 12, so this may be,
they'll have to do it too.
Maybe part of it. Jen, youth soccer. How do you see youth soccer these days? The pay-to-play argument continues and rages on. For full transparency, I run a soccer club, and I wish we had the government. I wish we had U.S. Soccer that could underwrite everybody, facilities, professional coaches, and we didn't have to charge one penny. But from my perspective, Jen, that's not living in reality. We've got to find a way.
You're not getting the fields for free.
Correct. And look, and we give scholarships and we help as many people as possible. But where do you see the youth game going, locally, nationally?
That's such a tough call because that's the part of soccer. Well, that's part of soccer that I'm least involved in now that I'm not working at Soccer for All anymore. But I do feel almost like women's soccer, we're in this really strange transition for youth soccer where you've had the people, it's like, well, shouldn't we do it the way the European model does it, which has its pros and cons.
It does.
Right? You have these clubs that have now decades of histories. It's like, well, why should the club change what's working? I think the biggest question that needs to be answered is when we have a country so large with such a huge population that we know has either grown up with soccer or through their parents, it's in their DNA. Why aren't we tapping into that talent pool, right? Like when you look at the U.S. women and even the U.S. men, it is bizarre to me that the Hispanic representation is almost nil.
Yeah.
And that's part of the pay to play. We know that the people getting opportunities are mostly the ones that are at a certain economic level, and they're going to ODP or whatever it's called now, and they're getting college spot. But if you're not in that little network, you're not getting seen.
I agree with you, and that leads into my last quick hit, Latinas in the game. I fundamentally believe this, that young Hispanic women who previously, because of machismo, I'm going to say this, were not allowed to play by their papis, by their tios, are now able to do that. I'm seeing it at the youth level, at the high school level, and since they understand the game, because they watch it with uncle, with grandpa, with dad.
Right, they grew up watching.
Correct. It's in their culture versus, I'm going to say this not to be confrontational,
I totally understand.
versus a young lady who's a great athlete, and by the way, she feels she can get a scholarship playing soccer, so parents orient her in that direction, but she doesn't have the passion for that. That family maybe grew up playing football, basketball, baseball, but Latinas, I think to me, are the future of U.S. soccer because it's cultural, it's relative, they'll have the support. We just got to get past this, oh, my little princess can't play because women, girls don't do that. Believe it or not, Jen, there's still people that think that way.
Oh, I believe it. And one of the things that I noticed over the years watching the girls that came through the Rice varsity soccer program is they would graduate and they weren't interested in following soccer anymore. Yeah. They were burned out. They had been pushed to a level it was no longer fun, right? And they did not grow up in a family that soccer was social or soccer was something that they watched. It was something that mom constantly drove them to. They were pressured or motivated to get that college scholarship, but once college was done, they weren't interested anymore.
Yeah.
I want that kid that's grown up, living and breathing soccer, watching soccer. I saw the change in just the 7 years that I was working at Soccer for All in terms of what jerseys we could get and the knowledge of the kids coming in. what players they knew, how many players
Sure.
they knew. So I feel like, these last couple of cycles of kids, their awareness of world soccer is huge compared to the previous ones. Now, specific to Latinas, like you said, I remember helping coach a friend of mine's team in Sharpstown, and most of the 12-year-old girls were Hispanic.
Sure.
And it was fascinating to see how excited they were to hear from me, an adult woman, that I played soccer, because they had never seen that before.
Identify with that, yeah.
Yeah, and of course I'm like, I'm just a rec player, but I could see them run back to their dads and go, she plays soccer too.
Why can't I?
Right? Yeah. So, and that was a long time ago. So, I love, like, what was it, 4 or 5 years ago, that Liga MX said, hey, all of you have to have a women's team. There's no reason not to have a women's team. And that they set up a 10-year plan of, okay, it's going to be U23 to start. We're not going to have foreign players start, but we're going to build each year. And we've seen, oh my gosh, the Dash hosting Tigres.
Yeah.
And we had Maria Sanchez on loan in June. There's so much potential there. And that's why I mentioned with the U.S. women's national team specifically, it's ridiculous that they've had almost no Latina representation in their entire history. They've had a couple, but almost none.
Jen, I could talk soccer with you all day. I can't thank you enough, and we need to do this again. And hopefully we'll work together soon. And there's a couple of projects I'll call you about, by the way. But look, I want to thank you for not only for being with us today here on Deportes Nation, but for your passion and your love and your care for the sport. I wish we had more people like you genuinely caring about it. I'm sure you've spent time, energy, and money, relationships, all kinds of things that many of us have lived through and have come and gone because we love the sport so much. So I can't thank you enough. And again, I want people that are watching to know that you really care for the sport. Where can they follow you, Jen? I know you're also behind Keeper Notes and so many other things.
That's the easiest way to find me, on Twitter at Keeper Notes, or my website, keepernotes.com. I also do a women's soccer podcast called The Mix Zone, and that's linked at keepernotes.com. So Keeper Notes is really the place to go.
There we go. The one and only Miss Jen Cooper. Jen, we can't thank you enough. I know we'll be seeing you soon, but we really appreciate your time today.
Anytime, Alex.
With that, ladies and gentlemen, I want to thank all of you for spending time with us on this latest edition of Deportes Nation. Please take care of yourselves, and until next time, here on Deportes Nation.